You are listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour.
Welcome back to the Radio Hour podcast. I'm your host, Justin Beahm. It's been a while since we had a chance to chat here. It's been a very, very crazy summer for me production-wise, and I've finally emerged from the other end of the tunnel. And as you can probably hear, I think my body was pushing me in that direction anyway. I've been down for the count for about a week here, and I think I'm finally starting to turn the corner on whatever this thing is that has been plaguing me. So thank you for tuning in for this episode. My guests on this week's show are Kristian Day and Dylan Sires. They are the minds behind the HBO Max original documentary series Taken Together, Who Killed Lyric and Elizabeth. The show just landed on August 8th on Max, and it landed at number 1 when it came out, which is wonderful. The show is about two girls who were killed here in Iowa. They're cousins, and this happened a few years ago in 2012 and remains a mystery in terms of who actually did it. Dylan, who's the director of the piece, he spent years on this himself. As you'll hear in the interview, he breaks down the timeline on this project. And Kristian is producer. He also, I think, did some camera work and things like that on it. Kristian and I go way back to some of my earliest film forays here in Iowa. He is producer du jour for the entire state for commercials, industrials, all kinds of stuff. And recently has moved into some pretty well-known documentary too. He does have other shows that are out there on some of these different streaming services. He has one that we discussed for the show that just came out called The Last American Gay Bar as well. So the beginning of our discussion was on Taken Together. The second part of it is on The Last American Gay Bar, with some fascinating stories behind both. Kids being kidnapped in Iowa, it's something that is woven into my youth, at least. I grew up in the age post Johnny Gosh. He was a boy, paper boy, who was kidnapped in Des Moines, Iowa, when I was a kid, and another unsolved case as of yet as to what exactly happened to him. He was on the back of milk cartons all around the country, and his story became quite famous. A lot of that was due to the tireless effort of his mom, especially, to try and get the case solved. So when things like this happen, people in the state really want to help. I think people most anywhere want to help in some way. And I really, really admire and applaud Dylan in particular, Dylan Sires, for his efforts on Taken Together, which again took years for him to bring to fruition. And I definitely recommend it as a watch on HBO Max. And I hope you guys enjoy the discussion on that. After the interview, we'll have voicemails like usual. These are a little bit older. I think I put the call out on this back in July when I was anticipating keeping up with a weekly schedule like I had been on this. And what I had asked people to call in and talk about is just tell me about someone who's inspired you. And I think you're really going to like some of the responses that we got here at the program. So that'll be following the interview with Dylan and Kristian. As far as news with me, it's been, like I said, a crazy summer here. I don't think I've ever had more projects on the coming soon page on my website than I do right now. It's just crazy. So to break a few of them down, well, I'm actually, first of all, recording this on the release date, September 17th, of Bringing Out the Dead on 4K and Blu-ray from Paramount, which I've talked about before on the show. It was a real long, very passionate journey to get that film to today, to this date, when it's hitting the streets and landing in mailboxes. And I encourage everyone to check that out from the Paramount Presents series. It is available on Amazon, and get in there while you can to pick up copies. I think they had to expand the run on it because the initial buy rate was so fast. When they announced pre-orders, it was instantly number one, which was amazing. Now here we are, the day when it lands. So I would love to hear your feedback on it too. It's not just something that I put a lot of passion into, but also I'm incredibly proud of it because it was an A to Z experience for me, from concept through to delivery. And the wonderful team at Paramount, both my internal executives, my marketing partner, and then the incredible archive team who got me so much to work with, especially on the historical interviews from on set. I just tip my hat to all of them. I'm so honored to have been a part of the project, and I feel like it's a real full circle kind of moment, which I've had quite a few of lately. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute here. But as of today, as I'm recording this, Bringing Out the Dead is now available. So check that out and reach out with your feedback once you get a chance to. Really appreciate that. Upcoming titles, also from Paramount, landing October 1st, is Volume 2 of the Paramount Scares box set series. Last year, when the Volume 1 box set came out, I was a part of that in getting the amazing opportunity to step in as the guest editor of the special edition of Fangoria that was included. They do have another special edition specific to the box of Fangoria in this year's box, but I'm not a part of that. This time, included in there is Breakdown, the Kurt Russell film that I was so excited to be part of on the Paramount Presents release a couple years ago, with amazing special features that are all porting forward here. All the discs that are in this box are 4K. So this will be Breakdown's first time on 4K. They also come with Blu-rays for all the movies too. So that's coming out October 1st. There's a 4K version on Steelbook of the Blob remake, landing that same day from Shout Factory, and that has all my special features from the Blu-ray a few years ago. Scream and Shout Factory on October 22nd have The Wolfman, the Benicio del Toro film, hitting 4K with special features from me. Eureka is releasing Tank Girl on the 28th of October, and they haven't unveiled the final artwork on that yet, but I do have pre-order links for that and all this other stuff on my website, justinbeahm.com. But it's neat to see Tank Girl continuing and those features to live on from what was really one of my very, very first releases years ago when I was first putting my toe in the water for this stuff. Also, at the tail end of October, on the 29th, is Shocker, finally hitting 4K from Shout Factory. I love the film Shocker, and it has so many tremendous special features from the previous release. This one, I got to add some more on top of that incredible list, and so that was fun to be part of. Once we get past October, of course, we're moving into the holiday season, and how appropriate, Krampus on a 4K Steelbook from Shout in a variety of packages. That's November 5th when those land. There's some that have posters, some that have a snow globe. I mean, there's all kinds of options in there, and it's all broken down for you on my site. The Full Moon Fright Box, Volume 1, is going to be hitting November 6th, and that's from the good team over at Umbrella. And for that one, it has Dollman, Demonic Toys, Dollman versus Demonic Toys, and Dollman 2, and Demonic Toys 2. And it was a lot of fun to do that, to dive into the world of Charlie Band and his crazy Full Moon universe. And one of the pieces on there that I think I mentioned maybe on a previous episode that I'm most excited about is I did just a standalone piece with new interviews and behind the scenes on the Full Moon Video Zone segments that used to sit at the tail end of all the videotapes when you would rent them. It was such a revolutionary thing, especially for a company of that size, to take the time to put all that on there, where they were teasing upcoming films, interviews, and behind-the-scenes footage from the movie you just watched. It was absolutely revolutionary. Of course, behind the scenes and making of had existed for a long time prior to that, but those were usually for special editions like Laserdiscs and things like that, or for TV specials. Well, Charlie Band took it upon himself to tack these on to the end of just about every release for a long time. So that is part of that box set that is coming out in November. Born on the 4th of July hits 4K on November 12th. That's the latest collaboration with Oliver Stone, and I've had the great honor of Also working on JFK, Natural Born Killers, The Hand, JFK Revisited, and this is another one in that line that was a real treat to be part of. That's November 12th. A week later, A Simple Plan lands on Blu-ray from Arrow Video. They have UK and US releases available for pre-order on that, and I have new special features there. One of the real big ones that was announced since the last episode of the show landed here is from Shout Studios, hitting 4K and Blu-ray on November 26th, and it's Mike Flanagan's Hush. This project was absolutely incredible. The number of special features on there, I mean, it's everybody from the cast. It's crew. There's new commentaries. There's 2 different versions of the film, in fact. The brief story on that is that while they being Mike and Kate, his wife, and the lead co-writer in the film, when they were checking out the new transfer and audio mix for this 4K release, they were in the booth at one point, and whoever was running it for them had eliminated the track or muted the track for the music. And Mike was just in love with it. Oh my gosh, this actually works. And the movie had originally been envisioned by Mike and Kate as black and white. So there's this second version of the movie, only on this release, called the Shush Cut, that is black and white and has eliminated most of the score for its entire running time. And it's an incredibly immersive experience. I mean, you're really there in the house with her, and it adds a lot to it, that black and white. You're checking out the shadows for any kind of movement, things like that. It ratchets up the intensity in a really wonderful way. And I spent 2 days at Mike's house with him, his family, the cast and crew as they were coming through, shooting these interviews and recording these commentaries. And it was incredible. Like I said, it was amazing. And this is a great release. Also unique because it's been rescued from the vast ocean of streaming world. Mike's premiere on this was on Netflix when it landed a few years ago. And then after a while, the license was up on there, I guess, and Mike got it back himself. And then the deal was made with Shout Factory, as long as it was done the right way and with full openness to, just go nuts with the release. And so that's exactly what has happened here. And that's coming out November 26th. I'm planning to bring some folks from that film on the show here at some point so we can talk in a little more depth about what all is included there and their experience with it. It's just neat to see something emerge from the streaming world where we're having movies just literally disappear now. Films that were picked up for distribution on a streaming service and then have never made it beyond to any kind of physical release. And so when those licenses expire, where does the film go? If it's not shopped around or picked up somewhere else, it just literally dissolves. It goes nowhere. And then it becomes only available in bootleg circles, which is where Hush was. In fact, in my early work on this, the only way that I could get a copy of Hush, because they didn't have the transfer done yet, was to buy this kind of booted version off this guy. And that's all that I had to work with. And funny enough, actually, when I went to Mike's house and as I was getting ready to leave, I showed that to him because I brought it as a backup just in case there was any problem with the digital files we were working with. And he said, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing." And he was actually humbled that fans had taken it upon themselves to get it back out there once it was no longer on Netflix. And so I don't usually do this, but I was like, "Hey, would you mind signing this? It's kind of an unusual thing here." And he did sign it for me, which was really cool. And he was amazing. Kate was amazing. The entire experience there was second to none. And he is the biggest, this won't be any surprise to anyone who follows Mike at all, the biggest Stephen King aficionado I've ever met in my life. We hit it off right away when he was showing me around the house and showing me options for rooms to shoot in and stuff like that. When I walked into his collection room, well, he refers to it as the library. And before I even saw all the books, before I saw any other memorabilia, right to your left, when you walk in that room, is the cane that the character of Linoge carries in Storm of the Century. Now, Storm of the Century is one of my absolute favorite made-for-TV films. It's the one that King wrote for the small screen, and I think it was brilliantly handled. That movie is so good, and it's also one of my favorite audio commentaries of all time. You got Stephen King, the actors, the director. I mean, it's one of the best listens that you can find, and I think it was so wonderfully handled. But I've always thought that Kane was so cool, kind of in lineage with the Kane from The Wolfman. Like, it's an integral part of the story, instantly recognizable. And when I walked in that room and saw that Kane, I go, Mike, you have Linoge's Kane? And he looks at me and smiles like, you're a Storm of the Century fan? I'm like, yeah. He's like, no one ever knows what this is. And then we instantly were like bonded from that point forward. And it was. He said, yeah, this is the hero Kane from the film. He has every edition that you can imagine of all of King's books sitting there. It's overwhelming to sit and face that wall. When you watch the special features on the Hush disc that's coming out, most of the interviews were shot around that room. We just kept kind of rotating the setup in there, and you'll see the outstanding library that he has sitting there. And on those same shelves is the typewriter and the hero heavy sledgehammer from Misery. There's memorabilia everywhere. He has screen used props from X-Files, from everything that he loves. And then in his home theater, he has props from his own films, which is really cool. The hat from Dr. Sleep, of course, the mask from Hush, along with the corkscrew. He has costumes in the back of the room. And then also scattered around the walls in there, he has memorabilia he's picked up from a lot of his favorite films. So the Redford's glove and bat from The Natural. I mean, the mask from The Rocketeer. He has an arm from Terminator 2. It's overwhelmingly cool. And what he said to me as he's giving the tour that I never expected, he goes, feel free to pick whatever you want up. Feel it. Check it out. You want to put the hat on, put the hat on. You want to wear the mask, put it on. He said, I would have loved to have a chance to walk in a room and be so close to this stuff. So he said, have at it. And I didn't abuse the privilege, but I did slip the Hush mask on once and took a little picture, and had to just at least have a glancing touch of like the bat from The Natural. And there was Feel the Dream stuff there, which has an Iowa tie, of course. It was just so great. It was amazing. Everything you've heard about Mike and Kate is true. It's not often that you meet someone like that and you have such a thoroughly, consistently wonderful experience, but I absolutely did. And one of the things that you're going to see on those special features as well, in the interview with Mike, at the beginning, we started talking about when he was a kid, he was making movies in his backyard with a VHS camera, like I did when I was a kid with my brother and my friends. And he's like, yeah, I think I still have some of that stuff somewhere. And if you've listened to anything with me before where I talk about like Bad News Bears or Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, some of the greatest moments of working on those special features for those releases are when someone mentions, oh yeah, I once shot this thing. Or like in the case of Bad News Bears, Jackie Earle Haley's dad had a 8mm camera on set one day and ran it for a little while before they got in trouble and he had to put it away. And then I'll say, is that available? Can you get that to me so we can scan it? Well, the second day I got to Mike's house, I walk in, the first thing he does, he's like, Justin, here you go. And he hands me a couple videotapes. And so when he's talking about his early films when he was a kid, his own version of The Untouchables, he also did a version of, and then it cuts to the footage. So you're seeing a very young, like junior high age Mike Flanagan acting in this stuff along with his friends, having shootouts and everything. Some really funny dialogue too. There's one piece from The Untouchables that I gave a moment of its own in the documentary piece just because it's so adorable. You get to see how his title crawls worked back then, and a nickname that I don't know has ever really been revealed about him before, but he does in his early movies from when he was a kid, he adds a nickname for himself that his friends or family must have given him at that time. So that's in the credits. It's something that hasn't really been promoted, but I think it's a wonderful Easter egg that fans of Mike and his work are really going to think is cool. And so that was an honor to be able to include that stuff in there, fully flesh out the perspective on Mike Flanagan, the artist, that from the time he was little, he knew he wanted to be a filmmaker. And Hush was a big moment for him. And now look where he's at. I mean, it's just incredible. In fact, the other day in interview stuff for Life of Chuck at Toronto, I think it was at TIFF, someone asked him about, hey, is there going to be the Dark Tower at some point? Is this going to happen? And his answer was kind of like, never say never. You know, there may be things happening, which is quite exciting because that's one that could be done right. And it would be done right in his hands, as was Hush, out November 26th from Shout Factory and Scream Factory. And then also just announced prior to recording this, Bewitched, the complete series on Blu-ray. This is from Mill Creek. Not necessarily the label you think of for a deluxe edition of anything. In fact, historically, and they absolutely do admit this when you talk with them, they have been known as a budget brand. They've been feeding the bins at Walmart for many years with those low-cost movies, which are great because it gets movies and TV series into people's hands. And a lot of times, historically, when a show would be remastered and put out on something like a Blu-ray or whatever, it would be incredibly expensive, and so it puts it out of the reach of a lot of the fans out there. So I do applaud Mill Creek for their history and for how they've actually fostered the legacy of a lot of films on those multi-disc sets, like the Drive-In Classics and things like that, where these are films that no one else would ever care to release at all. But they were able to justify it by putting it in these box sets that are now treasures, because so many movies in those sets haven't seen the light of day since Mill Creek have given them some attention. So Bewitched was a very unique project. This began after I had worked on The $6 Million Man and The Bionic Woman several years ago for Shout Factory. On those, I teamed up with historian Herbie J. Pilato, who had written books about all things $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman, and everything. And he has done several books on Bewitched and has been a real caretaker of the legacy of that series for a long time. He made the comment to me when we wrapped that project for Shout. He said, we should find out who has the rights to Bewitched because it's the 60th anniversary in 2024. I was like, well, let's look. So I look it up, find out it's Mill Creek. And he's like, let's go. And I'm like, I don't know anyone there. I don't even have any contact information there, but I'll see what I can do. And Herbie is tenacious. He's also very driven and completely dedicated to the preservation of history, especially with Golden Age television, which is absolutely his forte. And a couple days later, he texts me and he goes, hey, Justin, you have time for a call? I get on the line and he goes, hey, I wrote to Mill Creek and I got a response. I'm like, what? Who did you write to? And he said, I just went to their website. I wrote to the general inbox and said, hey, we should do something for Bewitched's anniversary. And he got a response from someone inside and they want to talk. That's how it was all born. I mean, Herbie took that chance, reached out to them at this general email box that you normally would assume would not be monitored at all, and heard back just a couple days later. And that led to what has been about a 2-year journey on this thing, from the point of the very first discussions on it through to completion, which just happened about a week ago here. And what it is every single episode completely remastered on Blu-ray. We have new commentaries on, I think, 16 episodes with Herbie, with some actors from the show, with some people that were associated with actors from the show, historians. It's really very, very thorough. And then the real diamond in the whole set is this half-an-hour documentary called Bewitched Behind the Magic that we did. And Herbie was the writer on that, and he had all the connections in the Bewitched universe, brought all of these wonderful people to the table, and we got to do interviews with them. And then we went and shot everyone, and then I assembled it into this very fun, fast-paced, informative, and very heartfelt documentary that's on there. So there's a lot of reasons to get this set if you're a Bewitched fan. Historically, the releases of this series have been kind of all over the map. Some of them have the black and white versions of the first couple seasons. Some of them have the color. Some of them are in different aspect ratios randomly throughout the box. It's been kind of wild, but Mill Creek, to their credit, has really pulled out all the stops to give every single episode full love, full attention, and to present them properly with great new audio, beautiful new picture. And then you have the commentaries, that new documentary, and there's a booklet in there written by Herbie about the history of the show that features a lot of his really rare insight into its production, the people who were involved with it, and its legacy. So that's coming out, that's in February of 2025. So that's a little bit down the road, but it was just announced, and it was a project, again, that took an eternity to bring across the finish line. And when that finally happened, boy, Herbie and I just sighed a big sigh of relief because, man, this is finally done. And we're both very, very proud. He was serving as co-producer on it, and he was really leading the charge on the whole project from the outset. So an honor to have been part of that as well. In other news around me and Reverend Entertainment, there are a couple magazines on newsstands right now that I appear in. I'm in the new issue of Scream, which is the magazine out of the UK. It is available everywhere in the States as well, most notably at Barnes & Noble. It's the September-October 2024 issue, number 86. And this one has a story to it. Forgive my long intro here today. There's a lot to catch you guys up on. My piece in this one, and then there's the second half of it's going to be running in the following issue, number 87, is on the Night of the Demons 1 through 3 films. Night of the Demons, especially that original, has always been so close to my heart. Not only is it fun, not only is it gory, but also it really captures the Halloween vibe. I love the soundtrack for it. I just love everything about this movie from Kevin Tenney. And this article was actually born 15 years ago. And I don't know that I've told this story on here before, but when I was first looking to get involved with publishing outside of like the newspaper work I've done in the past and things like that, I wrote to incoming editor Chris Alexander at Fangoria. And this is before I think it had even been officially announced that he was going to be taking over as editor from Tony Timpone. I wrote to Chris and I said, man, I would love to write for the magazine. I have a sample here. If you would take a look at it, I've always dreamed of being in these pages. And he wrote back and said, thank you for submitting. Man, when the dust settles, which right now things are really crazy, I'll give it a look. And I thought, okay, well, we'll see if that actually happens. Well, he did. And I don't know, maybe a week or two later, he wrote back to me saying that he absolutely loved it, but he admitted this is way too big for Fango. This would be very hard to make small enough for the magazine and print it. And I didn't really know that going in. I delivered this really bloated article where I interviewed just about everybody I could get my hands on from parts 1, 2, and 3. It's extremely thorough and densely populated with quotes and behind the scenes stills that I had as well. But on the Fango side, Chris said, what else have you got? And I had a list of things I had been thinking about writing, but I didn't have anything else written. But anyway, I said, here is what else I have. And I sent him a list and he's like, great, I'll take them all. And then all of a sudden I had to write like 12 stories to start getting this ball in motion. But to the point, Night of the Demons sat on a shelf, quote unquote. It was just sitting on a drive for me here. And I didn't really think much more about it. I went on to other business with them. To go way back, the origin of even the Night of the Demons article was when I was in the movie Collapse. This film is directed by my buddies Mike Saunders and Jason Bollinger, who you probably now know from Attack of the Killer podcast, which has been running for an eternity out there in the world of genre podcasts. At that time, they were a production company here in Iowa called Prescribed Films, which they still do dabble in a little bit. They got a little bit more budget for a film due to some tax incentives that were happening here in the state at the time. And then they brought in Chris Mulkey and Karen Landry to star in this crazy zombie movie with a genuinely inventive twist at the end. And I, on a whim, had tried out for a zombie role in it. I didn't have anything to do with movies at the time, really. And I saw the ad in the paper and thought, well, what the hell? Showed up, and next thing I know, they're slapping zombie makeup on me and putting me in blood-soaked clothes, and I'm stumbling around the streets of West Branch, Iowa, where the production basically took over town for about a month. This was back in 2009. Also in that film was Linnea Quigley, and we bonded over lunch one day, both being vegetarians, and we hit it off, and I thought, geez, I would love to interview her for something. My favorite film of hers is Night of the Demons, and so I said, would you ever be interested in doing that? And she said, absolutely, here's my number. Give me a call. And then a few weeks later, I gave her a call, and the whole thing just snowballed. Next thing you know, I'm writing to Kevin Tenney, then I'm on to, just everybody you can imagine just about that was involved in Night of the Demons 1 through 3. I'm on the phone with them over the next month or two here. It was nuts. So I put this monolith article together, and it did nothing for a long time, although I had, like I said, started writing other things for Fangoria, and that was all great. Fast forward to maybe 2 years ago, and Scream magazine out of the UK, the wonderful editor there, Rich, has always been open to pitches from me, and I had turned something into him, and he asked, what else do you have? And I said, well, the only other thing I have sitting here right now, because I'm so crazy with production that I can't really crank something else out in the moment, is this gigantic Night of the Demons thing, if you want to take a look at it. And he said, yeah, I'd love to read it. I sent it his way, and then about an hour or two later, he wrote back, it's like, I'll take it, I'll buy it. Let's do it. And so we made the deal. It was sold, and then I didn't hear anything until maybe about a month ago here as we're recording. I saw a teaser image for the upcoming issue of Scream, issue 86, and there in the corner is Angela's face, Night of the Demons, a horror party to remember, it says. And I thought, could it be? Could it be? And then I write to Rich, and I said, Rich, is this the thing? And he's like, yeah, because I'd broken it into 2 parts for him. Part 1 is all Night of the Demons 1, just the original, with some crazy stories. And then part 2 is going to cover the second and third films. So he was excited. It's finally hitting print, and my comp copy just showed up. And I'm amazed that Rich didn't cut anything. He's letting this thing run in full. So this is a massive article that's in this magazine. And I don't know any other magazines that would really give that kind of real estate to something like this, but there it is, Night of the Demons, issue 86 of Scream, now available everywhere, also at Scream Horror Magazine's website, and then Barnes & Noble, everything like that here in the States. I hope you enjoy it. I'm terrified to even look at it. I can't imagine. That was pretty early in my magazine ventures, as I said, and I don't know how good it is, but it's out there at least. Another full circle moment. See, I said that would happen again in today's episode, and there's another one that really came full circle. Also on newsstands right now, of course, there's the new issue of Remind magazine, where I have my monthly column at the very back of every issue called Roadside Memories. This is a great monthly magazine that's kind of retro entertainment. I'm sure I've talked about it before on here. That's put out by TV Guide. And it's one that a couple times I helmed the Halloween issue, the October issue of, and one year turned it into all Halloween franchise stuff, which was really cool. And I think very unpopular with their regular readers. But after that, I pitched this idea for Roadside Memories, which is a monthly column about defunct amusement parks, roadside attractions, and things like that have shuttered over the years. And I really enjoyed writing it. This is maybe my 3rd year of doing this every month. And the newest one is on the Hagenbeck Wallace Circus from Peru, Indiana. I love the research in them. It's always right on the back page, and Remind is available everywhere. And then the last full circle moment for me is I'm in a tiny way, the new issue of Rue Morgue, the October issue. In all the years, it's the one that I never, out of all the major horror magazines, it's the one that I haven't managed to get into the pages of. Because there's Fango, Famous Monsters, Horror Hound, Delirium, Scream, all these other magazines. But Rue Morgue, that I've loved from the very beginning, when they first were at least available here in the States, because it's published in Canada, I've been such a huge fan of what they do. And especially their October issue is always a must-buy. Super packed every single year. And they're very daring with a lot of the coverage that they do and the concepts that they come up with for their different features. So I'm in this new issue in a column about the 50 vilest villains in horror. And like, I don't know, the last 50 years, something like that. And I pitched them on doing little bits on Big Ronnie from The Greasy Strangler, and then also Jack from The House That Jack Built. And so those are the two pieces I have in there. I'm pretty sure the Greasy Strangler one is incorrectly attributed to another writer, unfortunately, but those are my two pieces in there. And then in the following issue, I'm going to have an article as well, as part of a column again. That'll be a little more from me, but it's thrilling for me to be on that masthead. After all these years, to finally have the opportunity is such a tremendous honor. So 3 different ways you can read something from me on the newsstand as this episode here lands. So the last bit is that I'm guesting on the Get Me Another podcast right now with my friends Rob and Chris. They have a great concept for this show where the entire conceit is they have runs of episodes where they talk about films that came in the wake of a Hollywood blockbuster, or like a big influential film that inspired a lot of sort of imposters in some cases, for better or for worse, but really films that initiated trends in cinema. So like Get Me Another Mad Max. I was on an episode where we did that, where we covered Tank Girl and Cherry 2000. In this case, and I'm on every episode in this run pretty much, it's Get Me Another Friday the 13th. So we're talking about different films that were inspired by Friday the 13th or are directly riffing on it in the wake of its success. And we break them down, and Chris does a great job of leading the discussion as we all chime in on the films they're making, the people that are involved, and the elements that reference the movies that inspired them. So that first episode of that run of Get Me Another podcast is now available out there in everywhere you find the podcasts, and I hope that you might give that a listen and check it out. I think we're doing maybe another 6 or 7 maybe episodes of that. We already have a few more recorded, so there's lots more to come, all within the sort of world, the ripple world of Friday the 13th. And then finally, I was recently on an episode of Bigfoot and Beyond. For anyone out there who was a fan of the Finding Bigfoot show, Cliff Barrickman and Jeff Bobo Fay are the two sort of main guys on that program. And since that show went off the air, they've had a great podcast running called Bigfoot and Beyond. I recently was on the show with Pamela Pierce, who's the daughter of Charles B. Pierce. And Pam and I were talking about the Legend of Boggy Creek 4K that she and I teamed up on last year. And a tremendous release that we're both very, very proud of, that has all kinds of good stuff on it. A new audio commentary where I brought in Lyle Blackburn to talk about the history of the film and just sort of the world of cryptozoology, especially around Bigfoot, Sasquatch, things like that. Then also, while we were working on that disc and its restoration, Pam found some behind the scenes footage that no one has ever seen before. And so I assembled, about 7 or 8 minutes of that into a really cool special feature that gives you some insight into Charles directing. Also, you get to see more of the monster. In the movie, it's kind of hidden in shadow a lot of the time, or a quick flash in a frame, but you can see that there was full-fledged, full presentation of the beast, footage shot and was not eventually cut into it, but is on this release. That's at legendofboggycreek.com. But anyway, I bring this up to say that Pam and I had a great time as guests on Bigfoot and Beyond with Cliff and Bobo. That's out there in the podcast realm, anywhere you listen to shows, and I hope you check it out and enjoy it. It's a really lovely little discussion about her dad and his legacy and the importance of that film, not just in the world of crypto stuff, but also in horror, because it has, I guess, pun intended, a really big footprint, especially by my perspective when it comes to found footage. So anyway, Bigfoot and Beyond, track that episode down, and I hope you'd like that. So, without further ado, this is my conversation on the very sobering documentary series, Taken Together, Who Killed Lyric and Elizabeth, now available on Max. This is me with director Dylan Sires, producer Kristian Day, and I hope you enjoy. I'll be back on the other side with voicemails to wrap things up. You guys, thank you so much for being on the program today. I'm really excited for this conversation about Taken Together, Who Killed Lyric and Elizabeth, and a few other odds and ends. So Kristian and Dylan, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Thanks for having us.
I'd like to look at the origin of this project. Dylan, this is something that you had been working on your own for a while prior to getting it into a sort of full production mode. Isn't that correct? When did you start with this project and what led you there?
So in 2015, it was around Easter. I think I was driving back from actually our family get together at Easter in central Iowa. And I was driving by Highway 20 and, Myers Lake is right there on Myers 20, and I was driving by and I'd worked at KWWL back in 2012 when the girls went missing and their bodies were found in December of that year. And while I was driving by, I just thought, someone should do a documentary on that. It's just a travesty. It's not solved yet. And then I kind of realized, like, hey, I got all the tools I need. I have a camera. I've watched people interview before, so I can give this a shot. And so I reached out to Heather and Drew Collins, and we met at a bar called The Cellar, had a beer, and I just basically asked them for their blessing to start filming. And so the first interview I did was on a Canon 5D Mark III with a Zoom mic with a lavalier, and that just started me off. And then I got my second interview because of Ron Steele, who is the anchor at KWWL, which is where I formerly worked at. And he had put in a good word with me with the what they call special agent in charge at the time of Lyric and Elizabeth's case. His name was Mike Ricassi, and he granted me an interview, and I have no idea why, because at that point the DCI hadn't really spoke out on the case. And so then I got my buddy Ned Mohammadagic to run camera operator, and we interviewed Mike Ricassi, and then just from there just slowly started to snowball over the years until 2017 when I met Kristian Day, producer extraordinaire. And I really didn't know much about filmmaking, other than just putting a camera up and asking questions. And I learned a lot from Kristian on, organization and goals and whatnot. And we started to, on weekends and sometimes during the week, just plot out 4 or 5 interviews that we could get. And so we'd do a batch of interviews, and then those interviews would lead to another batch of interviews, and those interviews would lead to another batch of interviews, until we got to the point where we had amassed over 100 interviews, cumulative interviews, and I want to say close to 500 hours of footage, because this doc started out as like an exploration, right? It's not your typical doc, which Kristian always says you always have like 6 months, right? You got to write it, film it, edit it, and you're in like a very short timeline. And then with this project, though, because it was done out of a labor of love with Ned and Kristian and I, we took our time. And when we all kind of felt it was right to take it to someone in LA to see if we could get something made, We did, and at first, several people turned us down because the case wasn't solved, and that's not normal in true crime documentaries where they'll do a doc on something that's unsolved. So it was an uphill battle, and then met a guy named Doug Banker who runs Five All in the Fifth, and he put us in touch with a woman named Jessica Sebastian Day, and her company's Maven, and she became like a real champion for us in LA, and got us to Warner Brothers Discovery during the merger of let me see, Discovery and Warner Brothers, and then from there we hired Donnie Eicher as our executive producer. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and then we bought out the bigwigs from LA, and we shot for about 4 more additional weeks, and then we went into heavy editing. So it was quite a journey.
That's wild. So how long from concept, when you were having that drive and you saw the lake, that spark, how long from then till turning this whole thing in once it was completed and assembled?
So I started in the spring of 2015, and I think we locked cut in the winter of 2022.
It's amazing. Now, Kristian, when you met Dylan, tell me about what drew you to this project and why you wanted to get on board.
Well, so it was fall of 2017. We were working on a narrative show together during the height of the streaming wars. So this was back when Verizon had their own network called Go 90, and they were filming a number of shows in Iowa, mainly, I mean, really Des Moines. I worked on one that I think actually was up in names too, but we were doing this narrative show called Play by Play. And Dylan was on the art department team. He was a set decorator, and then I was a coordinator on it. And he was returning some band equipment that we used for an episode of the show, and he picked me up in his gold uh, band van that so I previously had knew of Dylan from his band Sires and the Teddy Boys, which were around the Cedar Falls, Waterloo area. And so we met. My buddy Jack, our mutual friend Jack, had told me about Dylan a couple times. Like they'd done some music videos together, and he picked me up and was kind of telling me about it. And I think, man, I think was your kid too? Was Floyd two, one?
He might have just been born in 2017. He might have been
Ye-
6 months old.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember you were talking about you just had a kid, and you were telling me about this project. And I remember when the girls went missing. Um, I remember all the headlines, and then all of a sudden things went quiet on it. Um, after they were found. Uh, and he invited me over, and we kind of bonded over. We were talking about true crime docs, and I'm not a huge true crime aficionado. There's probably about, I can count on one hand how many true crime docs that I thought were important or even drove my interest. And the one that we talked about was uh, the Paradise Lost
Yeah,
trilogy.
yeah.
And I've championed that film series for years because at the end it did a lot of good, and it saved what was left of those boys' lives. But we started just kind of rapping about docs and what makes it good, what makes it bad. Because this is the true crime world, um, has definitely kind of turned into this grind with all these different series with the Discovery ID and a few others. And I worked on a bunch of those. I mean, I was like the guy they would send into the courthouses to pull all of the evidence photos, take pictures of physical evidence. Um, and, you know, it all felt like they were just feeding a machine. And I felt with this project that Dylan was pitching me actually felt meaningful. Um, and I watched his interviews. He was showing me, just string outs of B-roll and all the things he had, and I was feeling the same emotions that I had when I watched Paradise Lost,
Hmm.
and I felt like this could be something really important. And what kind of happened is Jack was actually helping Dylan first, Jack Meggers, and he had just gotten a grant to make his own film and needed to bow out. So I stepped in and started working with Dylan and Ned. Um, and I met the family and we just started getting as many interviews as we could, trying to put together, you know, a trailer or a sizzle. We made a deck together, um, and just really just trying to package it. But with one of the benefits, Dylan mentioned earlier, I always talk about there's like a 6 month timeline, but by the time you actually get funding for something, they'll tell you, the networks or the studios will tell you, okay, you got this. This is how many shoot days you have. This is how many post days you have. You got to turn in on this date, and you'll air at this date. So what was nice, even though we really would have loved to have funding because we were just paying for it out of pocket, we would get little investments here and there. Dylan, if I remember correctly, you cashed out your 401k for it to help pay for things. Your dad put some money in, and then I had a private investor named Jolene Pfaff out of Des Moines, who's always just been a champion of film. And I went to her and I just said, hey, we just need a little bit to just to keep going until this is sold. And we got some money from her, and we just kept going and going and going, which to some degree is great. You have more now than you'll ever need, and you have the ability to do that. The bad thing is you have so much footage, and you have to figure out how it's all going to go together. But when it sold, um, you know, there was a kind of a combination of everything we did with the LA team, and then all the stuff we did over the previous 7 years, which was pretty rad to see because you're seeing people's lives change.
Yeah.
It's almost a decade, and there's very few films that get to do that.
Yeah, usually it's a moment that you're capturing for sure. And you spotlight that nicely in the documentary where there's a bit where you talk about how they've changed over time. There was also the sort of dissolve of their relationship while this was being shot. And I love how you A/B people, because we all have that history and we all do transition in so many ways, including physically, mostly emotionally as time goes on. And with this being a case that's still unsolved, I really thought it was great, Dylan, how you approached the transition that this family was going through, because these things do change people. It alters the family structure. It alters all kinds of social structure. And you see that in this. When you were first approaching this, was it a hard sell to them for them to sit in front of the camera, Heather and Drew?
For Heather and Drew, not really. And actually, talking about like how, a tragedy like this can happen or a nightmare like this can happen. I remember Drew saying it's like someone driving a freight train through your life.
Hmm.
And he compared it to like winning the misery lottery.
Yeah.
And like those kind of things always stuck with me, because it's such a rare event, like a stranger abduction and then like a stranger dual abduction. They're just so rare that if it happens to you, it has to seem like, like Drew had said, like you won the misery lottery. Chance just came down and just picked your family. Um, but for Heather and Drew about asking them for their blessing for the doc, it wasn't a hard sell at all. It was just me kind of basically wearing my heart on my sleeve while we were talking and what my intentions were, and how the most important thing for me at the beginning and then for all of us was to do no harm in the case, because you all know about unintended consequences. Whenever you work on something, you can cause ripple effects across things you can't perceive. So um, Heather and Drew definitely jumped on and gave their blessing pretty quick. Misty and Dan, obviously they were skeptical of the media for all the right reasons, and so it was a little bit more difficult to get them on board. But as soon as they got down and they talked with me over the phone and met with Kristian and I, like they understood what our intention was. Like we always put at the foremost, most important thing in the doc are the two girls, Lyric and Elizabeth. If we do anything to hurt their case, we certainly didn't do them any justice. So, just having that goal and that priority and communicating that to the families, I think, made it seem more palatable to them. Because, the industry does have a reputation for not necessarily being aware or sensitive to unintended consequences whenever they do something.
Yeah, you have the girls' voices begin, like start and end, and then throughout it's sprinkled. So even in chapters of this story where you're focusing a lot on procedural things or interviews with these various other people, you're always reminding the viewer of the core reason why you're all doing this with the video, with the audio of the girls. And I think that's a powerful way to keep people engaged with what really matters. It's a wrenching watch. The series it's such an emotional thing, and you go in knowing that this isn't solved, that this hasn't been solved. But you made a lot of discoveries along the way. And you mentioned how rare it is for a double abduction, but you actually discovered that it's even in Iowa, which is a state that's not riddled with crime, there were a number of double abductions and attempted abductions happening. Can you speak a little bit about Jeff Altmaier and how you came across him and how you went into researching him?
So yeah, Jeff Altmaier. So he was a traveling salesman who would travel across the state of Iowa, and he would entice kids into his car with $100 bill. And this all went down a couple of years after Lyric and Elizabeth went missing and were found dead. And uh, yeah, he was like, when you saw that story break, you're like, oh, this could definitely be the guy who did this. He's driving around the state of Iowa. He's using money, which is a non-coercive way to get children into his car. I think they found when he got caught, he got found with drugs like Xanax, and you know, and he definitely piqued the interest of the DCI. And I tried to actually reach out to Jeff to try to talk to him in the doc, but he never responded. Um, the only thing with Jeff Altmaier, and actually Drew mentions this in the doc, is that uh, normally someone who does this, it's like a progressive type of disorder. So they normally don't go backwards. So once they are to abduct and to kill a child, they don't normally then abduct and let kids go, at least according to the history that is known about these crimes. And also, when he got caught, he got a life sentence. So he's in prison for the rest of his life. So, you know, you would think if he had an ounce of goodness in him left, if he had done it, he would admit that he did it, because there's no chance he's getting out of prison.
Right. Nothing to lose. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, he's still probably someone on the wall for the DCI, I would imagine.
One of the things that you also uncovered here were when you were exploring other cases, similar cases and things like that, that ended up opening a pretty big door, was Abby and Libby in Delphi. How did you come across that case, and what was your theory on it being potentially tied in here, and how easy was it to get them to participate in this, because they're still very young and their story is so raw and awful. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Dylan?
Yeah, so the way I heard about Delphi was actually Drew Collins sent me a text message and said it's happening again, right? Because the girls went missing uh, in February of 2017, and I think it took them 24, or I can't remember the amount of hours they were missing, but he had, that news went pretty regional, pretty national, pretty fast, and he had sent me that, so it was like automatically it's on your radar because it's two girls, of a similar age, similar background, and so it does. You think in your head, all right, well these might be connected, but you don't ever really want to jump to any conclusions, um, and ultimately they've they've caught the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator in Richard Allen, and he's gonna stand trial this fall. But I mean, you have to consider every possibility, right? Like, Kristian has said before, but like when you start this, you don't go in with the mind that you're going to try to solve this case,
Hmm.
because it's kind of a fool's errand, right?
Oh, yeah.
The police, they had the local authorities, Evansdale, they had Waterloo, they had DCI, which is the state investigative unit, they had the FBI. They probably consulted with multiple different other agencies. They had round the clock officers interviewing people. So a lot of time and resources was spent on the front end to gather information, right? And they do that for two reasons: one, to see if they can catch the guy right away, but also as time passes and if the case stagnates a little bit, they still have all this information they can then tap into later on to prove, this person X, his cell phone pinged on this tower on that day, in July of 2012. So, so Delphi definitely raised alarm bells, and you're watching, you're waiting. But I think ultimately the Indiana State Police came out and said that while they were similar, they weren't connected.
Okay. Yeah. Almost maybe in some of these cases when you're uncovering contemporary crimes that are going on, it has to be a bit of a relief to find that the person who did it has been arrested and put in jail,
Mm-hmm.
and knowing that one at least seems to have been solved. You did end up finding Michael Klunder in all of this, and a great deal of the film is bound to Klunder. Is this something you guys can talk about, by the way?
Yeah, I can elaborate on Klunder, his history and whatnot. When I first started out, obviously, Klunder was the big question, because when I started out in 2015, the year prior, they had ruled Klunder out as a suspect. But when I started the doc, you know, my I wasn't going to assume anything the cop says is gospel or Bible. It's like this is separate, like I don't have all the information they have. I can never have all the information they have. All I can do is like start from square one and just see if I can find a puzzle piece, find another puzzle piece, and do they connect. And so, in doing that, you look back at the history. Well, one of the things that first struck me was just the rarity of double abductions. As I was going back through the old Waterloo Courier articles, the old Gazette articles, the Des Moines Register articles, you know, it's something that at the time when it happened, and I was covering the story for KWWL, and I wasn't like a reporter. I was just like what we call a videographer, but back then we called a photog. Um, but looking back, like dual abductions, at least from what was reported, they were incredibly rare. So there'd been like 15 double abductions in the U.S. since the FBI started keeping records on that, which I guess happened sometime in the late 60s, maybe early 70s. And so when you start to look at Klunder and you look at his history, one, you see that he's prone to be violent towards women, but also then he had a dual abduction in 1990, December 1990, of two 3-year-old girls. And he goes to prison and he gets out in December of 2011, around that date. And then, 6.5, 7 months later, you have Lyric and Elizabeth's double abduction. And then you go 10 months later, and then you have Kathleen Shepard and Desi Hughes' double abduction in Dayton, Iowa. And so when I was parsing through the numbers, I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty crazy that Iowa has a relative small population in the U.S., but accounts for a large number of the double
Yeah,
abductions,
yeah.
and that two of those are Michael Klunder. You know, if you were going to just judge this crime and who did it based on probabilities, I mean, you'd be pointing straight at Michael Klunder the whole time. And then in 2015, when I talked with Mike Rakasi the first time, I asked him about Michael Klunder and said, usually you guys don't rule suspects out. So why come out and rule out Michael Klunder, right? You have Misty and Dan who, um, kind of were accused by the media and the public at large as being a part of the girl's murder because of their drug connections. And I'm sure they were investigated thoroughly, and now we're 3 years later and they still haven't ruled out Misty and Dan.
Right.
So it's like, why would you come out and then rule Michael Klunder out? And, what was communicated to me, or at least how I interpreted it, was, after Michael Klunder was announced as a suspect for the Evansdale case, the amount of tips in the case dropped off dramatically. And after a year of investigating him, they needed to get the tips back up. They couldn't place him in Evansdale. All the data was saying that he couldn't possibly have done this crime, but it didn't seem to me like he was saying with 100% certainty. It seemed like they didn't know if he did it or not, or at the very least, like they definitively couldn't say that there was a piece of evidence that said Michael Klunder could not have done this crime because he was in jail this day in so and so county, right? So for me, it seemed like they said he wasn't a suspect anymore because they needed to get the tips ups in the case. And right, like the definition of a cold case is that the police have run out all the investigative tips that they can find. So, that's why it's always important for people to tip the police on investigations, because even if they might not get back to you, investigations run on tips. And if there's no tips coming in, then that is the definition of a cold case, right? Because there's nothing for them to go run out to check, to investigate. So it seemed like there was a balancing act going on with the police where like they might have not known where Klunder was, but they might have had a good idea. But at the same time, they're not getting any tips in, and they need tips in so that they can keep investigating the crime. So they're like, well, let's just rule him out. And this is my interpretation. Again, like they didn't say this to me verbatim. This is just what I'm taking from them and parsing, reading between the lines of what they say. So it seemed to me like, okay, there's not 100% certainty that Klunder's ruled out. And this was more motivated in the sense that they needed more information coming in the girl's case. So they had stuff to investigate.
It's so frustrating because just as you're explaining here very concisely, when you watch it unfold over the course of the documentary, ruling this guy out seems so reckless. It seems so irresponsible. And I just kept thinking, track his cell phone. Just track his cell phone. You can see everywhere he was. He worked for this, hog confinement company and would be traveling around and things. So he was mobile too, as we were talking about with some others. And why didn't they take that step to use cell data at the very least?
I think that's what Kent Smock and the doc said, is they did track his phone. And what Kent says is that he couldn't have driven to Evansdale from Stratford, just where he was living at the time, abduct the girls, take them to Seven Bridges, murder them, and drive back in the amount of time that they could formulate with their data set.
Yeah.
And I want to comment on that, in regards to the cell phone. This idea of like, well, we can't ping him there. There's this real easy answer of maybe he just left his cell phone at home.
Absolutely.
Which to some people think is ludicrous, as everyone uses their phone for everything. But for a guy who spent a good chunk of his life in prison, my guess, and I think this is actually true, and you can correct me, Dylan, he had a flip phone. He didn't have a smartphone. And that's a very rural Iowa thing to have, is a flip phone versus a smartphone. So he doesn't rely on it like we all do. Our lifeline is our phone.
Yeah, and this was 12 years ago, so it's like
right.
Your chances of having a flip phone 12 years ago, or even, it seems like it's more likely you might have one in 2012 than you would right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, it's probably like a burner phone. I mean, if he didn't have much money getting out of prison and he's going to work for his father-in-law at the hog confinement, he probably just got something that he could have, and it was a way for them to track it. Turns in the number. You go for an afternoon and you're gone for a few hours and you're back. And, someone who probably knows those roads, he doesn't need it. Yeah. He doesn't need to use it. Like we use it for, like, we literally can't go down to the grocery store without turning on our directions to know how long it's going to take to get down there,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So, if you simplify it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. It
Yeah.
makes perfect sense how that went down.
Was your tie to KWWL the conduit for the news footage? Was the station very cool with you taking and using that footage, or was there any extra hoops you had to dive through for that?
Actually, no. So I left KWWL in 2013 and to play in my rock and roll band. And when I started doing the doc, I actually reached back out, and it was the same general manager. His name was Jim McKernan. Very swell guy, very wonderful man. And I just said, "Hey, I'm doing this project. It'd be great if I could, because I used to be the archivist there too and
Oh,
archive all the
that's great.
all the videos. So it's like it'd be nice if I can just go through the archive and just grab all the B-roll. If I end up nailing a deal for the doc, we can then negotiate a price for all the archive footage we use in the film." And he said, "Sure, let's do it." He said, "If Drew's with you, I'm with you, because KWWL, basically all the community stands behind the families. So, I went in and got all the footage. A lot of it I shot, not all of it, but a good portion of it. I had shot as a photographer there at KWWL, and um, that allowed us to make a sizzle that
That's so
eventually got it
rare.
got it made.
It's
Hmm.
so rare to have access to so much of that. Usually it's very, very brief clips to sort of ride under the fair use kind of boundaries. And it really helps flesh this out because you're establishing a long-term timeline on this, and that really helps. And what a neat way, Dylan, for you to get to sort of revisit work you had done in the past and feel like you're doing something important with it now. Because back then you were kind of a passive entity in the whole case as it was unfolding, but now you're very much invested in it and doing something very progressive with the medium.
Absolutely.
I mean, we should point out that that doesn't happen without having those previous relationships. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, especially as these news stations get bought up by conglomerates, Hearst or Clear Channel or whatever, uh, that normally doesn't happen. And I believe, is KWWL owned by like a larger entity, Dylan, now?
Yeah, they are. They were in
Yeah.
the hands of a Missouri company, but I believe that company then sold to a larger company. I'm not sure who owns them now,
I mean, there's usually
but I
so,
think but I thank them for allowing us to use the footage.
yeah. I mean, that's just a very rare thing. I mean, those are the little things that, like, as progress on this doc happened, those are like, it's sort of like that's your true north, like when these things would fall into our lap
Mm-hmm.
and be able to use them because it is very rare. Anyone who works in the doc world, like getting access like that, access is king for, I mean, any doc really. And the fact that Dylan was able to even get that material, it was, I mean, we were very, very lucky.
Were there any dead ends that you found that were frustrating throughout your investigative process, or maybe shooting, or maybe even some interviews that you're just like, this just isn't going to fit, I guess we'll cast this one off to the side?
Yeah, there was a number of storylines that we had to abandon when basically you're given 3 episodes, so you have 2 hours and 40 minutes to tell this story. So what are the most important points that what's the ultimate thread? What are the most important story segments? And talking with Donnie Eicher and stuff, we just said, let's follow the case over the 10 years, right? Let's take it from point A, which is the day the girls went missing, to where we were at then, which was in 2022. Um, and, because you have to focus, right? We had so much footage. So we had to, make editorial decisions like, all right, what are we cutting out here? What are we cutting out there? And because it's an unsolved case, a lot of the things ended in question marks,
Yeah.
right? Because we just don't know, right? Um, it wasn't really frustrating for me because I'm a big like I pri I prize the journey over the conclusion, right? So it's the process that I really enjoy to some degree, that I get enthralled with, is just like doing the daily grind.
Sure.
Looking up names, checking property owners, at the time, things like that. You just like you're not really getting anywhere, but you're more or less becoming more aware of everything, because it was my goal to know like everything that was happening on, July 13th, 2012, like everything that was happening in the Cedar Valley, which includes Evansdale, Waterloo, and Cedar Falls, Elk Run, to know like what's going on in this community that day. What are the cause and effects of something happening in Waterloo? Does that have a ripple effect in Evansdale? And you can definitely get lost in those details. They can be rabbit holes, so you have to make sure you're always questioning yourself and your judgment, because it can blind you if you let it.
Did you find it hard to stop?
Uh, I don't. We haven't really stopped. I still talk with Drew quite a bit. Christian and I both do. Um, we plan on to keep filming as the years go
Hmm.
by. It was like one promise that I made to myself, and I made to Drew. It's like, when I'm in this, I'm in it forever until this case is solved. And so we're going to keep working on it. And, if we get another season, amazing. If not, it's just something that I will do until the case is solved.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And since the show landed, tell me about when it premiered, which was on August 8th on Max, where it's currently available still. Tell me about the what you saw and what you started hearing from people after this thing hit. And it landed at number 1 on Max when it premiered. So, what have you guys experienced since then?
So I had a lot of emails from people who, had lived in the area at the time. And so they were, just emailing me their stories, what they witnessed that day, what they saw. I got a lot of phone calls from people who, you know, used to be in law enforcement, or used to be work in some government entity, or used to work, as a garbage truck driver. And, just filling me in on what they saw that day, right? Sometimes you get people who call you and they say they have information that's going to solve the case, and so your ears perk up, and then they just tell you about their life story, and it's it's a weird feeling, right? Because obviously, they want to talk to someone, and so you you essentially just become an ear for them to like talk about their trauma or their past, something that bothers them.
Hmm.
And I assume that's what a lot of these people do, to the detectives. They'll call in and say, "Hey, I got this information." And then soon enough, they're telling their own story about something else. And, you just have to listen through it, because at the end of it, they may say something that they don't even know is valuable. Um, that because you know as much as you possibly can, you can be like, oh, that's actually valuable. That triangulates another data point that someone else said, right? So you have to listen to it all. You have to bring it in and interpolate it, and see if there's anything useful from the information that you have,
That
because you don't know what you don't know.
that speaks volumes about the trust that people have in someone who's presenting a story like this, because you wouldn't be the obvious person on the street just if you hadn't made this for someone to walk up to and start opening up in such a personal way. But they do come to trust you, and I think that sincerity, I would imagine, that you guys approached the families with initially, and that led to, I'm sure, was woven throughout your pitches and things like that. The sincerity and wearing your heart on your sleeve, I would imagine, is felt by the audience as they're watching this. And it's incredible that so many people have reached out to you in its wake. It's kind of amazing that you're serving now as that sounding board.
Yeah, I always advise people to turn their tips in. Um, if they have tips, you need to go to this place and turn this tip in. Um, and you may never hear back from the police, but they got it. You have to trust that they got it. They're taking it in. They're putting it into their computing powers and figuring out if it's useful for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they hold all the cards in the case, right? It's their job to figure this out and have enough evidence to prosecute it beyond a reasonable doubt. Me as a filmmaker, and Kristian and I, like, we don't have that power. That's not our purpose.
I mean, I mentioned, and Dylan mentioned this before, but in past discussions, again, you know, when you befriend the family and you get their trust, we don't want to lead anyone down this path thinking that we will solve this. We are just here to document and elevate. We're not detectives. We're not law enforcement of any type. Um, and so, when someone, gives Dylan a tip, I mean, that's great, but we're not law enforcement,
Right.
you know. Or if someone gives a tip, but they're like, but I don't want, and it's actually good. They're like, oh, can we film this? And they're like, no. Well, then you just need to go turn that information in because there's not much we can really do about it.
Yeah.
The day it dropped, we were down in Tulsa working on our next doc feature, and it Dylan would in between shooting, Dylan would disappear for like an hour because these people were just calling and calling and calling. There's people that stayed up, until midnight for it to drop, and now it was just like this wildfire of information. And I mean, that's a good reaction. You want that,
Yeah.
Um, but there is this world of, uh, I don't advise doing this, but it could be, it is interesting, is the sleuthers that are out there and the Reddit threads going on right now about theories and stuff like that. You can truly get lost in it. But at the same time, what's happening is people are talking about it again. And that's the ultimate goal,
Right.
is that it's at the top of minds.
Without any details, obviously, do you think that since this landed, with this outreach that you've had from people, has progress been made in your mind, Dylan, on this case? Have you, and again, without details, have you heard things that you think are important to the case?
Well, I've heard they've gotten a lot of new tips in, but the DCI is does their job very well, and they're pretty mum. So if they've made progress, it hasn't, you know, gladly it hasn't made that information hasn't made its way to me.
Sure.
So, um, but I'd heard they were getting quite a few tips in that the phones were ringing, that the emails were coming in, and gives them hopefully a fresh batch of information that they can then use to figure out more things in the case.
People, but there's something admirable about the common person, not law enforcement, taking it upon themselves to want to help families, to want to help with closure. And that's what you guys have done here, is that you've taken it upon yourselves without any kind of outside pressure or influence to try to further this case and to keep it present and to keep it in front of people. And I applaud the work that you guys have done. I think it's a fantastic documentary.
Thank you, Justin.
And then I wanted to touch a little bit too, as we're heading to wrap things up here, on another project you guys teamed up on, which was the Last American Gay Bar. Kristian, you were really the driving force behind this one, which is out now on Out TV. Can you talk a little bit about the origin of Last American Gay Bar and tell the listeners what it's about?
Well, I mean, what it's about is about Blazing Saddle and Des Moines gay history dating back to Vietnam. And to paint a picture of where we all were when this thing sold, Dylan and I were traveling around Kansas City and Tulsa working on our upcoming project that will come out in December. And a lot of time and money was invested in it, and then the strikes happened, and it went into pitch, and the big streamer that said that they don't show this to anyone else said no. and
Oh my
we
gosh.
had hit a huge wall. Taken Together, we didn't know what was going on with Taken Together because we had shot it, with the LA crew 2 years or prior. We didn't know what the release was going to be, and it was just kind of a rough time. And I remember I was sitting on my couch and I had the title in my head, this Last American Gay Bar, because I've always been fascinated with subculture, um, counterculture, especially in a conservative state like Iowa. Anything like that is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And Blazing Saddle is the oldest gay bar in the state. Turns 41 next month, and it was started by a Vietnam vet. And I had the title, and at the time I was working with a producer who was hustling my projects, and he sold it for a very much a fraction of the cost of what everything else we were working on. And around the time the deal was finally done, uh, the other project that I'm not mentioning also sold.
Oh wow.
So now, so now there was two projects that got greenlit simultaneously. Now, Gay Bar was something I was the showrunner and director for. This other one, I'm just producing, and I'm also doing sound and lighting on it. But uh, now you're doing a dance of between
Yeah.
projects that you are fully responsible for. And um, not to go into super details, but we worked on this other project for 18 months and had not received a paycheck yet. So we were trying to just figure things out. Um, and the Gay Bar was one of those shows like, all right, you have 6 months. Here's your budget. You'll get disbursements once a month until like the final disbursement, which will come after delivery is done. And yeah, we'll talk to you again after you have a cut of Rough Cut 1, which that was, I think, August or September of last year when they greenlit it. And then I never spoke to a single person again until January. um, Money showed up, and we just went to work. And uh, Dylan came on to DP some of the interviews, and his time is also being split because he still has a lot of responsibility with directing this other documentary,
Sure.
which is unraveling in real time. Which that has been, I think, like that has been the trend in our working relationship, is doing these projects together that happen in real time, and those have their own stress because they're very unpredictable of what's going to happen next. But then Gay Bar is like the story's done. It's history, but it's a very closed history. There's not really much documentation anywhere, so it was just a lot of like word of mouth stories. But it was actually kind of like it was a nice like break from the hustle of the other projects,
Sure.
you know. And it was a project that, like, not to get into a political conversation, but when I set out to make that, I didn't want to make a gay show for gay audiences. That's preaching to the choir. I wanted to make something that everyone will want to watch and everyone can appreciate. Uh, you know, Blur that party line a little bit. And obviously, when it gets to the last episode, there's a lot more current event situations going on with the trans community, and there's just some things you can't completely ignore. But um, it was one of those things when everyone in the room was there to listen. Like, everyone was excited, you know. Everyone wanted to be there. And Dylan, he DP'd, like, basically, I mean, the main interview, which was Mongo, who's the guy that started the saddle. And when we were listening to him tell these stories about being gay in Vietnam and how there's so many of them, and Mongo's a guy, when you see him, you would never know this is a queer man. I mean, he's a man's man. Wears his Vietnam hat, flies the American flag, pro cop. He's very patriotic. Um, and that project, just what it showed me was this community that like lived in the shadows for so long, but it was so widespread
Yeah.
between the bars, between uh, the kind of uh, the fighting between groups. with the bar burnings. I mean, gay bar owners burning down other gay bars, you know, out of spite or whatever. I mean, it was just a wild, wild like story to uncover. And it's like, what is happening? How come? That's kind of what it felt like. The gay war of Des Moines that happened.
That no one
Uh,
knew about
no
outside of
one
the
knew
community.
about. Yeah, no one knew about outside of the community. Um, so it was just like this piece of history that I was just, it was something that I mean, I felt drawn to it. Um, and the community itself, like, embraced it so well. And it's a project that I'm very proud of. Um, very little money. I mean, very little money to do it. I mean, we basically mm, did use our resources, a lot of favors, but we got it through. Um, so I mean that we had a packed house. We showed the first three episodes at the Varsity Cinema in Des Moines about a month before the premiere date, and I was sitting in the lobby just having like an anxiety attack, and um, and sitting there. And I remember at one point, uh, Dylan comes out, beer in hand, big smile on his face, and he's like, "It's working." He's like, people are laughing, people are crying, and they're doing it so much that they're actually missing other things they should be laughing or crying about. But it was all happening, and that's, as a filmmaker, to see something that you're just like, you don't know. I mean, every time in all the projects we do, it really doesn't even matter the amount of money that's involved. You still spend the same amount of time on something, and you
Yeah.
still have the same emotions of how is it going to be received? Are people going to see what I see? You know. And then there's that moment you're like, and you're looking at your timeline of your edit, and you're like, what the fuck did I do? And that's every project, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did I get myself into? Um, but yeah, that series, I mean, no sizzle. I had a deck that was very different than what the final product was. It was really, it was the name. And I mean, I honestly think the name that sold it. I mean, I actually had to pitch, like, these are my characters. And the network was very into it because it was very different. I mean, the network's very WeHo, it's very Boys Town.
Sure.
Everyone's beautiful. And I brought this cast of characters that were just like blue collar, salt of the earth, you know, um, who really stand on their own, and they have their own community, and they've survived so much, um, and they're very proud. And I felt like this was something that I had not seen, you know, in anywhere really at this point, because everything's very it is, and these things are cool. Like, I love drag shows, I love all this, but I love the fabulous side of it. But this was just very gritty, and this is a community that a lot of people run away from, and I'm like, these are the people that stayed here and embraced it.
It really is something. As a filmmaker, you create something and you just hand it off to the universe, and then you sit silently and go about your business and hope that it resonates somewhere, and hope that it lands. With this, we talked a little bit about the feedback that you guys have received and the outreach after Taken Together landed. How about this one, Kristian? What have you heard in the wake of Gay Bar landing?
Well, after it came out, I started. I had a lot of people from around the country send me little notes and just say that was the community I grew up in. The bar itself has actually gotten a lot of feedback. They had someone email them from the Netherlands and, hey, I just watched the series, and I this was the gay world I grew up in.
Wow.
But they're like, but that was like in not Ireland, but like somewhere in Europe. And I mean, that's just, the fact that it's hitting those people, um, I mean, it makes it worthwhile. And there's been talks like, are you going to do a second season? And I'm like, well, it's not called the second to last American Gay Bar. I don't really. I'm kind of a one and done, because a lot of communities have reached out, like Corpus Christi, who was originally on our radar to potentially like do have the series be part of that. And then Omaha, Mississippi Beach down in Kansas City. But, I couldn't really embed myself in those places because you would have limited time and limited
Right.
resources. Whereas Des Moines, where I live, you know, you're 6 degrees from everybody. And so, um, a lot of the communities would reach out to, and I say communities, just general people from around the world who are part of a gay community. And they've had, again, like their history has never really been documented outside of like San Francisco or New York. And a lot of people are now trying to take it upon themselves to find these stories, even just like an oral history of what that world was. Because really, the documentation really didn't start until AIDS hit.
Hmm.
And even that was still pretty, very clinical. And then when there was the whole moral thing going on with Reagan, it was like the perfect storm. Um, but prior to that, everything was very, very hush hush. And a lot of people just like, we just don't have much out there um, for our own history. And a lot of people have kind of woken up from that. Um, Even like the older pictures, the oldest pictures I got were from private photo albums that were sitting in the basement of the saddle collecting mold.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Dylan probably can speak to this, walking in and we just have photo albums and stacks of boxes everywhere,
Hmm.
trying to figure out like what's this, what's that. A lot of nudist retreats, I guess. Someone must have worked at the 1 hour photo in town because a lot of them were like in the same packaging, and I feel like most 1 hour photo places would have like reported
Yeah, yeah.
obscene scenery.
Right.
But um, no, it was. I mean, the feedback was just all good, and um, I'm figuring out. I mean, I still want to work in the queer space. There's a couple projects I have in mind that I would like to do to continue that, which I think even now is even more important, just with political climates and things like that,
Hmm.
to hear voices. Um, so yeah, it still sits with me. Every day I think about at least some part of that story, um, and that wild world that they all lived in.
Thank you both for being on the show today. This has been amazing. Very, very insightful. And I appreciate you doing this.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Justin.
thanks, Justin. I have to say I put in my Steelbook Blu-ray of Big Trouble in Little China before I hit the road a couple weeks ago. Had a little bit of PTSD because I remember working long nights with you
Oh,
on putting
God.
the special features together
Oh, my
on
God.
that one that talk about the editing factory that was going on
Oh, it was
back
insane.
then. And I want to also, I'm not, if I haven't said this, the hand you had in the restoration of Legend of Boggy Creek is just the creme de la creme of restorations.
Oh, thanks, man. That was so amazing. What a great conversation about a challenging subject. They didn't approach this taken together like a normal true crime kind of a show because it's really not that kind of story. This is a very human story. It is a remarkably poignant watch, and I encourage you to check it out on HBO Max, where it is currently available, and on Out TV as Last American Gay Bar, a real passion project for Kristian. He and I have another project that we are teaming up on right now that he started, similar to Dylan with Taken Together years prior. This is something Kristian's been working on for several years already and has brought me into the fold on. I'll be talking a lot more about that in the coming months, in particular in 2025 when we really put things into high gear on it. But it's exciting. It's completely outside the realm of special features for me, which is absolutely where I am aiming right now, to expand into other arenas. And it's going to be so much fun to team up with him once again. And so anyway, I hope you enjoyed that discussion there. Let's move on to voicemails. The topic again was telling me about someone that inspired you. Doesn't need, no parameters on this, just someone who has changed your life in one way or another or inspired something And the first one here is from my buddy Josh Luce in Nebraska. Let's hear what Josh has to say.
Hey, Justin, it's Josh. So someone who influenced my life is someone I've never met. And it's actually John Williams, the in my opinion, the greatest composer that has ever lived. And the reason I say that is because not only does he take make soundtracks to epic movies, but he's someone who has on so many occasions captured the tone and the feel of someone else's work and made it his own. And what the reason John has impacted me so much is, as a musician, he opened up a couple of different worlds to me. Number one is the soundtracks and scores of movies. He was the gateway for me to guys like Basil Polydoros, Bernard Herrmann, Monty Norman, just all kinds of great, way too many to go into on this. But if you just look at John's work, I mean, Jaws and Star Wars and Jurassic Park, I don't need to go on. Your audience knows his impact, but for me, he was just he's brought so much joy to me because I'm huge into collecting soundtracks, as you know, and it's just he has not only been the soundtrack to so many pieces of art. He's in many ways been the soundtrack to my life. So anyhow, I've babbled a little bit. We'll talk to you later.
Oh, Josh, yeah. I mean, John Williams, talk about a master of his craft and still going to this day. It's absolutely incredible, all that he's had his hands in. And I love that you found someone in the musical realm that has had such a huge influence on you. Composers are one of those cinema elements that we don't often think a lot about, but it's so absolutely vital. Of course, I mean, I guess that goes without saying, but Williams is able to stir such deep, resonant emotion with his music. Everything that he's ever worked on, it's a very, very special touch that he brings to it. And I think that's a great choice. And it makes sense. You're a musician, and even just outside of music, this is someone that's touched all of us. So great to hear from you, Josh. Thank you for calling. The next one is from Greg Morgan over from Land of the Creeps. Let's hear what Greg's got.
JB, Greg Mortis from Land of the Creeps, calling in for your voicemail and your topic. And the one person that's changed my life, everybody knows, is my wife, Pearl, the Twisted Temptress herself. You all know, well, you knew me a lot longer before that, Justin, but you know once she came in my life how it's changed. And I give her all the credit, man. And not only me, man, look at Land of the Creeps and the group page and everything that she's done, like such an integral part of the podcast. And I got to give credit to where credit's deserved, and that's to her. So I'm going to say my wife, and that's not a cop-out either. That's just the truth. And JB, you definitely changed me too. You've been in my life for several years, and I love our friendship and the love that we share. But I'm hoping all the success to you once again, brother. Loving the podcast as always. And you're such a good dude. Cannot wait for your new future releases that will be coming out in the near future. Please give us some good movies like Elves. We love you, buddy. Until next time, this is Greg Mortis signing out. Peace.
Elves. Yes, I would love to be part of a release of Elves. Man, that is so long overdue. And it's one of those titles that keeps coming up over and over again on wish lists from people inside and outside the industry. But there's always these weird bumpers around some of these titles that keep them from proper licensing and re-release. I don't really know what it is on Elves. Typically it comes down to soundtrack issues, frankly. But I hope it comes out someday. You and I have talked about that movie, Greg, and I love it too. And I hope it can get some release and that maybe I have a little hand in it when it finally does. More importantly, what a beautiful tribute to Pearl and to the love that you guys have. I do remember life for you prior to Pearl. I know what you've been through in the past, and you and I have had some of the most serious, challenging conversations that I've had with anyone, and that goes for both of us. I've needed you a lot over time, and I was always happy to be there for you the same. And when you guys met, it was pretty much instantaneously this supernova of wonderful. I'll never forget when you were talking about her for the very first time and trying to describe her, and you were kind of struggling with the words because it seems you were blindsided by what you had encountered with her, which was the most charming, sweet thing. And the way that you have teamed up on Land of the Creeps, which has been running forever in the podcast realm, and now she's an integral part of it. Even when she's not able to be on the air for health reasons or whatever, you're always including her, and your love is something that I just absolutely admire, and that I think is a real testament to the fact that you never know in life when you can find the right thing. You just never know. It doesn't need to be in your 20s. It doesn't even need to be in your 30s. It can be at any point in life that you end up with the right hands in yours. I love you guys, and I appreciate you calling in to talk about that. And I know that Pearl's birthday is coming up here too. So if you guys head over to Land of the Creeps on their social media and all that, you'll find a phone number for voicemail, similar to what I do here. In fact, it was Greg who gave me the idea for this voicemail thing on my show. You can drop Pearl a voicemail happy birthday at some point. That would be really, really cool. Thank you for calling in, Greg. Appreciate it, man. And Greg, stay tuned because this next one is from the lovely Pearl.
Hello, Justin Beahm. This is Pearl Morgan. Excuse me for my voice because I am sick at the moment, but I had to call in. I want to give a huge shout out to my husband, Greg Morgan, because he is a huge inspiration to me. He has allowed me to know that there are great people in this world, and he has such a beautiful golden heart. He has totally, completely filled in that missing piece inside of me with so much love and even more so. So I wanted to give a shout out that he is my inspiration every day and every night, as well as my LOTC community family. Each and every one of them inspire me every day, all the time, and I'm so proud of them and love them all so much, including you. So hopefully, this message can be heard clearly. I'm sorry again because I'm sick, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it just, how do you not well up hearing this stuff? These guys have both been through so much in life, and for them to have found each other at this point I just love it so much. And for this to be a platform where they can share that, Pearl, thank you for calling in and sharing that. And I just love you guys so much. Greg, you're so lucky. Pearl, you're so lucky. And we're all lucky to be on the outside looking in. You guys are incredible. Thank you again for listening. This is the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. You can find me on social media. Just look for my name, the name of the show. I'm on Instagram and on Facebook. Also on my site, justinbeahm.com, you can sign up for the mailing list where you get updates anytime I put a new post up. I have CDs of my old surf and rockabilly band, Steve Reverb and the Soundtones, available on there. I have a sale going on right now with free shipping, so for just $10, you get the CD in the mail directly from me, and that's only $10. So that's all at justinbeahm.com. Stay tuned there for all the upcoming news about the various goings on with Reverend Entertainment and everything with my writing. I really appreciate you tuning into this episode and look forward to catching up with you again on the next.
You have been listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. The Radio Hour is a production of Reverend Entertainment, copyright 2024. All rights reserved.